Berel Solomon, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Funny story how we got here. Maybe we'll tell it. Maybe we won't. But it's a funny story how we got here.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I don't mind. I've been following you for a while on LinkedIn, kind of seeing your journey up and down. A good friend of mine speaks about you, Rabbi Jacob, who used to live in San Diego. I remember years ago we sat down in his living room and we talked about coaching and what we were going to do. And I thought, you're doing such amazing things in the Jewish world. I wanted you on the show. So I'm honored to have you here.
Appreciate that. Who's that, Jacob? Rupp?
Yeah. Rabbi
Oh,
Jacob
wow.
Rupp. Yeah.
He's the best.
Yeah.
Jacob is the best.
Yeah. So he lived in San Diego. He moved a couple of years back and we met through some acquaintances here. Someone's like, you've got to meet Rabbi Jacob Rupp. And I went to his house. We hung out for a while. Great guy. And I saw that you guys were connected. So
Sweet. Amazing guy. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's start with why you're here. I used to date a girl in Montreal, a Moroccan Jew. She took me out. We went to the clubs, we went to the bars. The scene was out of this world. I enjoyed every minute. We danced on tables. Drink. It was like right? I remember like you have dinner all of a sudden at like 11 o'clock. All the tables were taken away.
Bam.
People were just music, dancing, alcohol flowing. And you were part of kind of building that scene in Montreal. And then you went from that to becoming an Orthodox Jew. So take us kind of on that journey of what happened.
Wow. Okay, good. I didn't think we were going to go here today, but let's do it. All right. By the way, I would have paid good money to see you gal dance on tables. So when I was, as you mentioned, the Montreal has a pretty crazy party life scene. The legal drinking age is 18 years old in Montreal, in Quebec, and it's really just a suggestion. Like they suggest 18, but if you want to start earlier, you could start earlier. So I got into the nightclub business pretty young, like 17 or 18 years old, and I was the guy that planned, the parties for whoever needed one. I did a lot of high school graduations, and then I started making deals with nightclub owners to make parties in their nightclubs. And they would give me 10% of the revenue, and I would pack their place with 300, 400, 500 people on any given night. So I wanted to grow in that business, so I started to hire celebrities to come to the nightclubs. One of the biggest celebrities I ever brought, his name is Drake. You may have heard of him. For sure. The largest rapper on planet Earth. He actually happens to be Jewish, by the way. In his last song, somebody sent me, talks about going to yeshiva. So I brought him to Montreal, and at the same time we were filming the whole thing, because this was probably like 12 years ago when reality shows were just becoming popular at this point. So Kim Kardashian had her new reality show. You had Survivor, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. All those shows were just coming out. Plus Facebook was brand new, and it provided us the distribution channel to distribute the video. So we figured if we make ourselves celebrities, meaning the people in my company, if we make ourselves celebrities, people will pay us to start coming to their parties. So I hired a camera crew to follow us around, and they did for about 6 months. And I had all these celebrities part of it, and it was a big thing. And I went to go air the reality show on the big screen. So I rented out a nightclub, and I brought almost 1,000 people to. It was like a real red carpet Hollywood premiere with a paparazzi, the whole 9 yards. And when I aired it, I saw myself on the screen, and I stood for drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And I said to myself, "This is not who I want to be." And I hated who I was. And I left my own party without saying a word to anybody. I just walked out and hailed the cab, and nobody knew where I went. And I started looking for spirituality. In my mind, Judaism was false, because nobody put on tefillin, nobody kept kosher, and nobody kept Shabbos. So I figured that it was false. They probably looked into it. They probably knew something that I didn't know. So I started looking towards other religions. I went to mosques. I went to churches. I went to, I studied Buddhism. I said to my mother one day, I want to go to a Buddhist temple. She says, before you go to temple, go to shul. And I listened to her, and I fell in love with Judaism, with true, authentic Judaism. And I fell in love with Torah, and I met Hashem at 22 years old. I met God at 22 years old. And, fast forward today, I have not only do I have the business, I have 2 successful businesses, thank God, but I have a beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children, 1 on the way. Probably by the time you're hearing this, whoever by the time you're hearing this, it may be 4, and another 1 on the way. Who knows? But and Judaism has just given me everything, and I believe that Judaism is how could I say this? Judaism is what tempers the success. Because if a person has, we all know those people that are so successful, have all the money in the world, but they can't keep their life together. I mean, look at this here. Jeff Bezos, he's the owner of Amazon, got divorced from his wife, destroyed his whole family. I'm not saying divorce means that person's a bad person or doesn't have their life together, but you see that money does not equal everything in your life being perfect. Bill, what's his name?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, he it's a problem. You have all these guys that are so uber successful, but I believe that success and money is like a fire. A fire could either burn a house down or it could warm a house up. And I believe that Torah and Hashem have been the reasons why I've been able to be successful and also enjoy the success.
Let's dive into that real quick. I love that you mentioned that, because I listened to one of your podcasts, how you said, bring God into your finances. And now you're talking about how a fire can either consume you or make you grow even bigger, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, and we spoke about this in the pre-interview, in Judaism, we're taught to be perfect. We're taught to be successful. Yet you give this transparency on LinkedIn. If you're not following Berel on LinkedIn, you're like the LinkedIn king, right? So much content, amazing stuff.
Thank you.
It's very real. Like when stuff isn't good, you post it. When stuff is great, you post it, and yet you do have success. When you found Judaism and you were surrounded by this notion of we still have to be perfect, even though you found God in Torah, how did you break out of the mold to be able to be transparent and share and still not fear the judgment, the backlash, and still grow into a successful businessman?
It's a great question. I don't know if we didn't speak about this. I don't know if you know this, but I'm in the middle of filming a docuseries of that exact story that I just told you. And one of the big discussions that I had with my wife was, is this something that we want to put out or not? Because, we have kids, and eventually they'll go into dating, and their father's whole story is going to be there in the open. And it's nerve-wracking to sometimes be, transparent. Being from the chosen people means that you're expected to perform. So one of the things that I spoke to my rabbi about it, and he had a great answer. If you look at the Parsha Parsha Yisro, where that's the Parsha that we get the Torah from God. And yet, if you look at how did Turkish people say? They say Yisro? No, they say Yitro, right? Yitro, right? Exactly. Chabad says Yisro. Whatever. If you look at that Parsha, Yitro was actually the biggest idol worshiper that ever walked the face of the earth. I mean, he was a priest to every single idol out there, and yet they named the Parsha one of the most significant Parshas where we get the Torah after him. Why? Because it showed the beauty. It made a big Kiddush Hashem. It sanctified God's name because he saw the other world and he came to Torah. So I feel that by being real and being honest with people, not only does it not take away from me, but I believe that it ultimately sanctifies God's name because people associate Judaism with truth and truthfulness and honesty.
Dude, that's gold. We talk about that's gold, because sanctifying God and talking about truth, yet as Jewish men, we hide so much of our truth. Episode 2, talked about porn addiction and my porn addiction that I went through, and another Jewish man who was on to talk about it. And we don't talk about that stuff.
Yes.
We sit around the table and with our friends of 30 years, and we talk about what happened 10 years ago, but not saying like what I'm suffering through today.
So important. It's so important. That subject in particular, that needs to be spoken about. Because I also suffered in silence about that. And I'm a pretty strong dude. and it's important. It's important that people talk about it and to know other people are going through that, and other people are drawing strength from your experience.
I think a lot of people suffer. I see my dad. My dad, passed away 6 months ago from Parkinson's and dementia.
Oh, wow.
And
Sorry to hear that.
thank you. And one of the reasons that, we always talked was that my father held everything in.
Sure.
He didn't share anything. He didn't talk with friends to say, this is what I'm going through. My relationship is crappy at the moment. I'm stressed about my business, whatever that is. And some people say, you said, I found God, right? And I know that there's a peace in finding God. Yet I also believe that as Jewish men, we've got to create this brotherhood. And this is what the podcast is about, where we talk to each other and put down the swords and the judgment and just, you said it best, be okay to cry together.
Yes. So could I flip the script a little bit? Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from, that need to be, buttoned up, perfect? You can talk about, struggles like that. Like, I think even bigger than the struggle that you brought up, I think like finances. I think, Jewish men have such a pressure to perform financially that so many men are so ashamed of where they stand financially that they can't even ask somebody for help. So where do you think that this comes from?
So two places. I think one, it's society, where the chosen people, I have non-Jewish friends who say, oh, you're Jewish, you got some money, right? It's kind of like built in, where if we're Jewish, we have to be financially successful. And the second thing, and I love my mother so much, and I think that there's this pedestal that we're put on as Jewish men, that we are amazing, that we're going to be incredible, that we're going to have to be successful, where the men in our lives don't ever teach us to say, if you need help, raise your hand. If you need help, say something. If you need help, come to us. It's always the conversation of what I have, what I don't have, but never like, hey, it doesn't matter where you are as a Jewish man, raise your hand and ask for help. Because if you think about it, as a Jewish community, we all come together to help. People give tzedakah all the time. I saw an Instagram post, 3-year-old dies, family needs help. And I'm like, oh, here's my money, right? Like we're open to give and help, but there's this sense of we have to be at this certain level. And if we're not there, we don't belong. And that fear of not belonging scares the crap out of us. So we just swallow our pride, our ego, and we just suffer in silence.
Very interesting, actually.
And we might
although I will mention that, how do you fit that with the fact that, we do have rabbis and we do have somebody to go talk to. So maybe it's because we feel comfortable talking to the rabbi about it because there's a certain level of confidentiality, but you're saying to explore other resources outside of a rabbi, let's say.
So I'm going to take you my take on the connection between rabbi and community at the moment. So I'm the president of an Orthodox community with a very traditional membership. Out of the 160 families, probably 4 are Shomer Shabbat. I just started eating kosher meat and chicken after my mom had her stroke. So we're very traditional, but Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Purim, I do Shabbat, like the whole thing. I think there's a big disconnect between the rabbis and the more traditional section of Judaism, to where the traditional man sees a rabbi and says, he's smart, he's got integrity, but he doesn't know what I'm going through. So that's interesting. He doesn't have a business. He doesn't this. So there's that disconnection, right? You talked about it back about your story where your friends were kosher. They didn't put on tefillin. They thought it was false. There's a big sense of that in the world that I run in.
Oh, wow.
Right. So,
wow.
So that they don't talk about that. Then you have the confidentiality of the rabbi. I go speak with my rabbi. My rabbi is my friend, my mentor. He's an incredible human being. But sometimes I feel like speaking to the rabbi isn't enough because those that you consistently surround you with see you with a different eye.
Sure.
Right? You go to your therapist week by week, you have issues, you talk about your issues, that's great. But then you sit with your friends and you're BSing a whole conversation because you don't want them to see the truth.
Right.
So if 5% of my time with my rabbi, I'm honest, and 95% of my time, I'm not. I run my life.
Great point.
I run my life in a lack of integrity because 95% of the lane, that's what I'm driving in.
Wow. Beautiful. I never looked at it like that. It's absolutely right. It's so nice to live your life in integrity. One thing that when I was dating my wife, and her family was doing research on me, the biggest compliment that I ever got, I feel, that the rabbi said to her, that they called my rabbi, and he said, he will never talk to you about the weather. He just doesn't care. And he's not going to talk to you about sports. He just doesn't care. He talks about real things.
Yeah.
Not to offend anybody who likes sports. It's good. It's everything. But yeah, to live a life of integrity, it's very powerful.
I think it's not easy, of course, right? I think I went through a course called the Landmark Forum, and they talk about how you have to try to live life in integrity. You'll be out of integrity all the time. You've got to come back to it and speak into being in integrity. And I think that goes back into what you mentioned before, which is like meeting God. I wanted to kind of ask you, a lot of people say that, like, oh, I became religious. And what does that mean to you when you say you met God? I meet God. I put on tefillin once in a while. I look at my tefillin. I'm like, I don't deserve to put it on. I've been a bad person this day. And yet you live your life talking about you met God. Your posts on LinkedIn talk about God. Like, there's this faith that I respect so much. Actually, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach did a post yesterday, how he went to a Muslim woman and said, hey, I respect the fact, right? I respect your dedication to your faith. And it's the same with you. So talk to us about what that means. Like, I met God. There's guys listening to this who are like, what the heck is Berel Solomon talking about?
So when people used to ask me if I believe in God, I would always say the same thing. I would say to them, I don't know. I never really spent the time to look into it. I think an atheist, anyone who says that they're an atheist, what they're really trying to say is use a fancy word for saying, I never really looked into it so deeply. So therefore, I'm going to call myself the super fancy term atheist because it's woke today.
Yeah.
An atheist just means you never really spent the time looking into it, because anybody who spends any amount of time looking into God realizes that it's so obvious. It's such an obvious thing that there's a creator to the universe. You could calculate that the sun rises to the exact minute every single day. You could calculate to the next million years without, it's too perfect. Even a watch, every now and then you have to resynchronize it. You're going to tell me the universe doesn't need to be synchronized? It's just so when I say that I met God when I was 22 years old, I only experienced God 4 or 5 times in my whole life before I was 22. And I'll tell you what those are very simply. When I was 5 years old, I remember I was looking for a little round ping pong to go into this gun that I had as a kid, and I lost all the ping pongs. And I can't tell you why. Maybe because I'm a Jew and it came naturally. And as a 5-year-old kid, I said, God, please help me find a ping pong. Like, I knew who God was. I was 5. And as soon as the word ping pong left my mouth, and I opened, wouldn't you believe, there's a ping pong in the drawer. So I was like 5 years old. Then I remember when I was like 12, 13 years old, we would go to Florida every year. And I remember being so scared of airplanes because my father's father died in a plane crash. And I would remember being so scared of being in airplanes. And every time before I went to Florida, I would be in my bed and I would go like this, and I would say, God, please make sure that the plane lands safely tomorrow. And that was my only experiences with God. That's it. So for 22 years, I had about, 6 minutes of, spending time with God. And I had no idea who the guy was. I had no idea what he wanted. And I thought that he didn't exist. I thought he was stupid. So when I was 22 years old, I started to, as I mentioned, after the reality show, I started to look for different ways to live. And the truth is, a person cannot know who God is without Torah. So I got very into Buddhism, I mentioned at one point. And the point of Buddhism is to quiet your mind, to be one with the universe, to be one with the world. The problem is, it's very hard to be one with the universe. Like, what does that even mean? What does that look like? Who is the universe? And why would I want to be one with it? When you read Torah is like, it's like a bowling ball. it's like a bowling ball has like those 3 latches that you could put your hand into so you could pick up the ball. So Torah is almost the same thing. It's almost like a handle that God is such a big concept. Torah is like a handle that you could hold on to God with, and you could understand who he is. So from learning Torah, you get to understand God in the same way that you would understand your father or your neighbor or your friend or somebody on the street. He has characteristics, he has needs, he has wants, he has desires, he has goals, he has dreams, he has emotions, just like the rest of us. So from learning Torah, I understood, you begin to understand this big concept God, you get to understand who he is. And that's what I mean when I say I met God.
And then you talk about, I love that, by the way, thank you for sharing it. And then you talk about how bringing that spirituality, bringing God into your business creates a more successful business, creates better finances. So I've said to my clients before, the more you get healthy physically, the more money you can make. So talk to me, for the guys who are listening, as Jewish men want to make more money. What does that mean to you? What have you found when you say, when you bring God into your finances, you become more successful?
Right. So 2 things come to mind. I was working for my family business, which was a great experience in terms of learning, but a miserable experience in terms of personal happiness and joy. Because all of my brothers, all of the men in my family are all alpha males, and us working together was very, very difficult.
War.
And I remember there was a time where it was so hard in my business to be just, I was like, I was suicidal at one point, like not like clinically or anything, but I was like, you know what, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. And I remember that I had decided that I was going to leave my business. I was going to leave my family business and start my own. I had been there for a decade. I was earning almost $250,000 a year. I had had 2 kids. I had a wife. I had, a mortgage, 2 cars, tuition, diapers, all the good stuff. And when I quit, I went down to 0. And I remember the last day of work, I was driving home, and I was driving on the bridge, and my wife was on speakerphone, and I start crying, and I said, and I was banging the steering wheel, and I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know where, but I know and I trust that God is going to take care of us. So God is that safety net that gives a person the confidence to jump from one rooftop to the next. Because without that safety net, you cannot take that jump. So God allows me to be risky because I understand that there's something higher. There's a higher, technically a person, leaves a family business. That's all they ever knew.
Yep. I've been there.
Technically, they should not be successful. Happened to me, my family business didn't lose any revenue from me leaving, even though I was the biggest salesperson, which is also a miracle because then my family would have been upset at me. So that's 1. And then 2 is particularly when it comes to charity, when it comes to tzedakah, there is no better rocket fuel on planet Earth for making money than giving charity. Because at the end of the day, God will give you more money if he knows that you know what to do with it.
I love that.
And if he believes that the money is going to destroy you, he's not going to give it to you. And if he knows that when he gives you $1 million, then automatically $100,000 is going to a synagogue, a yeshiva, to help something in Israel, whatever it is, then he's going to give you that $1 million because that's how he's going to get his 100,000 to his people that he needs to get it to.
Man, that's huge. I the part of the giving, it really, when I give, and I love to give, it makes me smile. And you talked about the family business. I went through the same thing. When I left the family business, my dad was like, how are you going to make money? This is all we know how to do.
Yeah. This year with God's help, I'll give $100,000 to tzedakah, to charity.
Amazing.
And next year, I think I'm going to double it.
Awesome.
And I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. You just have the goal.
You're allowed to test God with charity. And I think that I'm going to test him with $200,000. And I think I'm going to bring everybody along on the journey, to be honest with you. I think at the beginning of the year, I'm going to post it that, hey, I'm pledging $200,000. Yeah. Everybody watch me. Let's test God.
Yeah. I can see it because of all the content that you create. And you're a content machine. And that's one of the things that I could have brought you on to talk about like, oh, how to be the best in your industry and how to, grow your business. But the truth is, I want to talk to you because you went through something, and your belief and your faith has created that financial ability for you to be able to give back more. And I think that's more important than just how do I become the biggest and the best on LinkedIn. You talked about crying to your wife. For those of you listening, like, when was the last time you actually cried to your wife and said, man, I don't know what to do? Or are we just standing in a space of pretending like everything's okay? She's thinking everything's okay. And then when it hits the fan, your family's like, what happened?
Yeah.
So
I just mentioned on the charity thing, my first year in business, my rabbi pledged me for $36,000. And I had no idea. In the previous year, I had done 18. So he doubled me in my first year. And I thought it was such chutzpah, but it was the vessel that brought me the blessing. So you should know that I usually pledge when I don't know how I'm going to be able to fulfill it. And God always makes it work. So the truth is the 36 at that time was more inconceivable than the 200 next year.
So essentially it made you stretch to be able to get access to the abilities to make the money you needed to be in integrity with donating 36K.
It opened up Shemaim. It opened up the heavens.
Amazing. Incredible. I want to ask you one last question. This has been epic, brother, by the way. We can go on.
You're good at this, by the way. I have to tell you, it's one of my favorite interviews. This is great.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know how Yigal got the interview, can I tell them or no?
Yeah, I don't mind.
It has nothing to do with Yigal. It's just because I am on LinkedIn, I get at least 3 to 4 requests per day to be on podcasts. And if I said yes to every one, I would
make money.
I wouldn't make any money. So I usually just brush it off. But I put a post yesterday that if anyone wants to get me a remarkable, it's like this thing that you write on, and it's like a fake piece of paper, but it registers it with a pen, whatever. So Yigal said, okay, done. I'll get it for your birthday. I'll get it for you now. Just come on the podcast. And it's something that I would never buy myself. Like I'll never spend $400 or $500 on that for myself. But that's how we got here. So it just goes to show determination. So I respect it.
Thank you. Listen, we've been playing tug of war for a while. We've been messaging here and there, things like that. And when I saw that post, again, it's about being resourceful in business and about, doing what you need to do to get it done. I was like, so I did it selfishly, to be honest. One, I was like, let's get you on the podcast. And two, I want you to try it and tell me if it sucks or not. And let me know if I should get one.
The truth is, if you had come to me and said, I want to pay $1,500 to be on the podcast, I probably still would have said no. And it has nothing to do with you. It's just, where's my time best spent? Yeah. But for the $400 thing, I said yes, because I would never buy it for myself. It's not like I would take the $1,500 and go buy it. Yeah. I don't know. It's just the way my mind works, I guess.
I love it. So let me ask you this question. I know you're a busy guy. We've got a time table to stand to. And I don't want to even take this anywhere else when it goes to growing a bit. I don't want to even go there, to be honest. Maybe part 2 when I buy you the Remarkable 3 or something like that, right?
Well, I am looking into a McLaren F1 if you're...
That's right. I love it. Maybe one day, brother. Maybe one day.
Good.
In the pre-interview, we talked about, bringing Jewish men together, how we see eye to eye and, crying. I want to ask you a question. You mentioned when you were at your lowest low, you called your wife, banged on the steering wheel, and that's when you cried. I want to know what makes Berel cry today? Successful businessman, 2 businesses, tons of LinkedIn followers. What makes you cry today?
The last time I cried was in Meron. What happened in Meron? That 45 people died. One of my friends, one of my business friends. He was a client of mine. He still is. And I was making kiddush on Friday night, and I was thinking about how he's missing somebody at this table, and I was just crying hysterically. So I think that other people's pain at this point really gets to me.
Love it. Thanks for sharing, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, Berel Solomon, thank you so much. Again, we can go on much longer. Look up Berel on LinkedIn. He's a beast on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. So much incredible content, so much amazing information. And look forward to your documentary that's going to come out hopefully soon. I think that's a big thing to take on. And we always say at the end of the podcast, Chazak Baruch, Chazak Bematz. You guys say Yasher Koach.
We actually say Shkoyach.
Shkoyach, exactly. I try to do it with my Sephardic sense, but I'll say it in English, strength and courage to getting that done. Brother, thank you so much.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much, Yigal.